I never thought a 10-inch snowfall would turn my life into a legal battlefield. But that was before I met Patricia Henderson, president of the Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association in Spokane, Washington. The whole nightmare started on a frigid Tuesday morning in late January when I found a certified letter wedged into my mailbox. My name is Ashford, and I had been living peacefully in my modest 2-story colonial for 3 years without a single complaint from anyone. I worked as a software engineer from home, kept my lawn pristine, and never made noise past 9 o'clock. Model neighbor material, really. I tore open the envelope while standing in my driveway, my breath forming small clouds in the freezing air. The letter was printed on official HOA letterhead, complete with a little embossed seal that probably cost more than it should have. It informed me that I was in violation of Section 7.3.2 of the HOA bylaws regarding failure to maintain safe snow load levels on residential roofing structures. The fine was $800, due within 14 days. I read it 3 times, certain I was missing something. Snow load levels. I looked up at my roof. Sure, there was snow up there. We had gotten hammered with back-to-back storms over the past week, and probably 10 inches sat accumulated on my shingles. But so did every other house on the block. The entire neighborhood looked like a Christmas card, with thick white blankets covering every roof in sight. I went inside and immediately started researching. The Spokane area could definitely get serious snow, and roof collapses were not unheard of in particularly severe winters. But this was hardly severe. 10 inches was manageable. My house was built in 2018 with modern engineering standards. The roof was rated for significant snow loads, way beyond what currently sat up there. I pulled out my closing documents and found the engineering report that stated my roof could handle up to 40 pounds per square foot. The current snow was maybe 10 pounds per square foot at most. This was insane. I called the HOA office number listed on the letter. A woman answered on the 3rd ring with a tone that suggested I was already inconveniencing her. Riverside Meadows HOA, this is Brenda speaking. Hi, my name is Ashford. I just received a violation notice about snow on my roof, and I think there has been some mistake. Hold, please. The line clicked to generic hold music before I could respond. 3 minutes passed before someone else picked up. This is Patricia Henderson, HOA president. You are calling about a snow load violation. Her voice was sharp and clipped, the kind of voice that probably made customer service workers cringe. I kept my tone polite and professional. Yes, madam. I received a letter this morning stating I am being fined $800 for snow on my roof. But every house in the neighborhood has the same amount of snow. I am confused about why I am being singled out. You are not being singled out, Mr. Ashford. We have issued citations to multiple properties that are in violation of our safety standards. Can you tell me what those standards are? Because my roof is engineered to hold much more weight than what is currently on it. I have the structural documents if you would like to see them. There was a pause, and I heard papers rustling. Mr. Ashford, the HOA bylaws clearly state that homeowners must maintain their properties in a safe condition. Excessive snow accumulation poses a risk not only to your property, but to neighboring properties and persons who may be nearby when a collapse occurs. But there is no risk of collapse. My roof is rated for loads 4 times what is currently up there. And again, every other house has the same snow. Other properties are being addressed according to our inspection schedule. Your property was flagged during our most recent assessment. The fine stands. You have 14 days to pay and to remedy the situation by removing the excess snow. My jaw clenched. This is ridiculous. I am not paying a fine for a manufactured violation. Then you will be assessed additional late fees and potentially face a lien on your property. I suggest you read your HOA agreement more carefully, Mr. Ashford. You signed a contract when you purchased your home. Good day." She hung up before I could respond. I spent the rest of the day furious, pacing around my house and periodically glaring at the snow on my roof like it had personally betrayed me. By evening, I had calmed down enough to think strategically. I pulled out my HOA agreement and started reading through the bylaws, all 73 pages of mind-numbing legalese. Section 7.3.2 did exist, buried in the maintenance requirements. It stated that homeowners must take reasonable measures to prevent dangerous accumulations of snow, ice, or other materials that could compromise structural integrity or pose safety hazards. The language was vague enough to be essentially meaningless. What constituted dangerous accumulations? What were reasonable measures? Nothing was defined. I also noticed something else. The bylaws gave the HOA broad discretionary power to levy fines, but also included provisions for dispute resolution. Any homeowner could request a hearing before the HOA board to contest a violation. The hearing had to be scheduled within 30 days of the request. I drafted a formal letter that night requesting a hearing and sent it via certified mail the next morning. I also took extensive photos of my roof, my neighbors' roofs, and every other house I could see from my property. If they wanted to play games, I would document everything. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out on a Thursday evening at the community clubhouse. In the meantime, I did some digging into Patricia Henderson and the rest of the HOA board. Social media made it easy. Patricia was exactly what I expected. A woman in her late 40s with perfectly highlighted blonde hair, an obsession with posting about her leadership role in the community, and a habit of leaving passive-aggressive comments on neighborhood forum posts. She lived in the largest house in Riverside Meadows, a sprawling 5,000-square-foot Mediterranean-style villa at the end of Crestview Drive. The other board members were less visible. There was Martin Yates, the vice president, who seemed to just rubber stamp whatever Patricia wanted. Secretary Linda Brennan rarely spoke at meetings according to the posted minutes. Treasurer Robert Cross appeared to be the only one with any backbone, occasionally noting concerns about spending in the financial reports. I also joined the unofficial neighborhood Facebook group, which turned out to be a gold mine of information. Dozens of residents had complaints about Patricia. She had fined people for having the wrong shade of white on their window trim. She had tried to ban vegetable gardens in front yards. She had sent violation notices for children's chalk drawings on driveways. The woman was a tyrant, and everyone knew it, but most people just paid the fines and moved on rather than fight. Not me. The day of the hearing arrived with another snowfall. Just 2 inches this time, but enough to add to the existing accumulation on everyone's roofs. I dressed in business casual, printed out all my documentation, and drove to the clubhouse with a briefcase full of engineering reports, photos, and weather data. The clubhouse was a nice facility, probably nicer than necessary for a neighborhood of 200 homes. The meeting room had a long table at the front where the 5 board members sat like judges. Patricia was in the center, wearing a blazer that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Martin sat to her right, looking bored. Linda was taking notes even though nothing had started yet. Robert was reviewing papers and looked mildly uncomfortable. The 5th member, a younger guy named Craig Murphy, was scrolling through his phone. About a dozen other residents sat in the audience chairs. I recognized a few faces from around the neighborhood. Patricia called the meeting to order at exactly 7 o'clock. "We have one item on tonight's agenda," she announced, looking directly at me with cold blue eyes. "Mr. Isaac Ashford has requested a hearing to dispute a violation notice regarding snow load maintenance. Mr. Ashford, you have 15 minutes to present your case." 15 minutes. That was all I got to defend myself against an $800 fine. I stood and walked to the front, setting my briefcase on a small table they had provided. "Thank you for hearing me tonight," I began, keeping my voice calm and level. "I am here because I believe the violation notice I received was issued in error and does not reflect any actual safety concern or violation of HOA bylaws." I pulled out the photos first, spreading them across the table so the board could see. These photos were taken the day I received the violation notice. As you can see, my roof has approximately 10 inches of snow accumulation. These other photos show neighboring properties with identical or greater accumulation. In fact, if you look out the window right now, you can see that every roof in this neighborhood has snow on it. Patricia's expression did not change. Martin yawned. Linda kept writing notes. Robert leaned forward to look at the photos more carefully. Craig was still on his phone. I continued. "I have also brought the structural engineering report from my home inspection, which shows that my roof is rated to safely support loads of 40 pounds per square foot. The current snow accumulation represents approximately 10 to 12 pounds per square foot, well within safe parameters. There is no structural risk whatsoever." I handed copies of the engineering report to each board member. Patricia barely glanced at hers before setting it down. Robert actually read through it, his brow furrowing. "Furthermore," I said, "the bylaw in question, Section 7.3.2, requires homeowners to take reasonable measures to prevent dangerous accumulations. The current snow level is neither dangerous nor unreasonable for this climate and this time of year. Every meteorological report indicates that this winter has been average in terms of snowfall for the Spokane area. This is normal weather, not an extreme event." I had brought printouts of weather service data and snow load safety guidelines from the city building department. I distributed those as well. Patricia's jaw was visibly tight now. She did not like being challenged with actual facts. "Finally," I said, "I would like to point out that selective enforcement of HOA rules constitutes a breach of the board's fiduciary duty to treat all homeowners fairly and equally. If I am being fined for 10 inches of snow, then every property in Riverside Meadows with similar or greater accumulation should also be fined. Otherwise, this is discriminatory enforcement." I returned to my seat, my heart pounding but my face calm. The board members murmured among themselves for a moment. Then Patricia cleared her throat. "Mr. Ashford, the board appreciates your presentation. However, you seem to misunderstand the scope of the HOA's authority. We are charged with maintaining property values and ensuring community safety. Our assessment determined that your roof presented a concern, and we acted accordingly. Other properties are being addressed on a rolling basis as our inspection schedule permits. Can you provide documentation of these other violations?" I asked. "Because I have not seen any other notices posted, and I have spoken with my neighbors. No one else has received a snow load violation." Patricia's eyes flashed with irritation. "Our enforcement records are not subject to public disclosure at the whim of every homeowner who receives a citation." Robert spoke up for the first time. "Actually, Patricia, homeowners do have the right to request general information about enforcement patterns. It is in Section 12.4 of the bylaws." Patricia shot him a look that could have frozen the remaining snow outside. That provision relates to financial records, Robert, not operational decisions. I am not sure that is accurate, Robert said quietly, but he did not push further. Are there any other questions from the board? Patricia asked, clearly eager to move on. Linda and Martin shook their heads. Craig looked up from his phone long enough to shrug. Robert hesitated, then asked, Mr. Ashford, has any structural inspector or city official expressed concern about your roof? No, sir. I have had no indications of any problems whatsoever. Robert nodded slowly. Thank you. Patricia stood. The board will now deliberate and render a decision. Mr. Ashford, please wait outside. I gathered my materials and left the room, along with the other residents who had been observing. We stood in the hallway, and immediately two people approached me. One was an older woman named Alina who lived 3 houses down from me. The other was a young guy in his 30s named Marcus. That was well done, Alina said. Patricia has been out of control for years. Someone needs to stand up to her. She tried to fine me for having a basketball hoop in my driveway, Marcus added. Said it was an unauthorized recreational structure. I ended up just moving it to the backyard to avoid the hassle, but it made me so angry. We talked for about 20 minutes before the door opened, and Patricia's assistant Brenda called me back in. The board members were all seated in the same positions. Patricia had a small, satisfied smile on her face that immediately told me how this was going to go. Mr. Ashford, the board has reviewed your appeal and voted on the matter. By a vote of 4-1, we have decided to uphold the original violation and fine. You are still required to pay $800 within 14 days and to remove the excess snow from your roof. Failure to comply will result in additional penalties. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. Can I ask who voted against upholding the fine? Board votes are confidential, Patricia said smoothly, though Robert was staring down at the table with obvious discomfort. This is ridiculous, and you know it, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. You are abusing your authority to harass a homeowner over a non-existent problem. Mr. Ashford, I would advise you to watch your tone. Hostile behavior toward board members can itself be grounds for additional violations. Are you serious right now? Martin finally spoke, his voice nasal and irritating. The decision has been made, Mr. Ashford. You can either accept it or face escalating consequences. Those are your options. I looked at each board member in turn. Patricia looked triumphant. Martin looked smug. Linda looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Craig was back on his phone. Robert met my eyes briefly and gave the tiniest shake of his head, as if to say it was not worth pushing further right now. I left without another word, my face burning with anger and humiliation. The other residents in the hallway looked at me sympathetically. Alina patted my arm. We knew they would do that, she said sadly. Patricia never backs down, never. I drove home in silence, my mind racing. $800. For nothing. For snow that was going to melt naturally in a few weeks anyway when spring temperatures arrived. For a violation that did not exist except in Patricia Henderson's petty, power-hungry mind. When I got home, I sat in my car in the driveway for a long time, staring up at my roof. The snow gleamed white under the streetlights, completely ordinary and harmless. Then I looked down the street toward where Patricia's house sat on its oversized lot. An idea began forming. The next morning, I called a real estate attorney named David Brennan who specialized in HOA disputes. His consultation fee was $200, but I figured it was worth it to at least explore my options. We met at his office in downtown Spokane that afternoon. David was a sharp guy in his early 50s with silver hair and a no-nonsense attitude. He listened to my story, reviewed my documentation, and then leaned back in his chair with a thoughtful expression. "You have a decent case for challenging this," he said. "The problem is that HOA litigation is expensive and time-consuming. Even if you win, you might spend $5,000 in legal fees to avoid an $800 fine. Most people just pay." "That is what they are counting on," I said bitterly. "Exactly. HOAs have broad authority under Washington law, but they are not unlimited. Selective enforcement is a valid legal claim, especially if you can demonstrate a pattern of discriminatory behavior. However, proving that requires documentation, witnesses, and often expert testimony. It is a real uphill battle." I slumped in my chair. "So I am just supposed to let them get away with this?" "I did not say that. You have options. You could pay the fine under protest and then sue in small claims court for reimbursement. The filing fee is minimal, and you would not need an attorney. You could also rally other homeowners and push for Patricia's removal from the board. HOA elections are governed by the bylaws, and boards can be recalled with sufficient votes." "How many votes?" "You would need to check your specific bylaws, but typically it is a majority of homeowners. In a community of 200 homes, that is about 101 votes. That sounded impossible, but I thanked David for his time and left. I spent the weekend thinking through my options. Paying the fine felt like surrender, but fighting a legal battle could cost me far more than $800 with no guarantee of success. Then, on Monday morning, everything changed. I was working at my home office when I heard sirens. Multiple sirens, getting louder and closer. I went to the window and saw fire trucks and emergency vehicles streaming past my house, heading toward the far end of the neighborhood, toward Crestview Drive, toward Patricia Henderson Street. I grabbed my jacket and followed on foot, along with several other curious neighbors. As I turned onto Crestview Drive, I saw it. Patricia's enormous Mediterranean villa, or what was left of it. The entire center section of the roof had collapsed inward, leaving a gaping hole surrounded by splintered beams and twisted metal. Snow and debris covered the ground around the house. Emergency personnel were everywhere, shouting instructions and securing the area. I stood there, stunned, as the pieces clicked together in my mind. Roof collapse. From snow load. Patricia Henderson's own roof had failed from the exact same winter weather she had fined me for not preventing. A firefighter was talking to a small crowd of neighbors, explaining that everyone needed to stay back. I caught fragments of the conversation. Massive structural failure, inadequate support beams, lucky no one was seriously injured. I learned later that Patricia had been home when it happened. She had been in the kitchen, which was in a different wing of the house, when the main roof gave way with a thunderous crash. She was physically unharmed but reportedly hysterical, screaming at the emergency responders about her ruined house. By that evening, the entire neighborhood knew what had happened. The unofficial Facebook group exploded with activity. People were posting photos, sharing the story, and most significantly, pointing out the absurd irony. Patricia Henderson, who had been fining people for not removing snow from their roofs, had her own roof collapse because she had not removed snow from hers. Someone found out that Patricia's house was built in 2005, during a period when the builder had cut corners on several properties before going out of business following multiple lawsuits. Her roof had never been properly engineered for Spokane's snow loads, but she had apparently never bothered to have it inspected or reinforced. The next day, I received another letter from the HOA. This one was signed by Robert Cross, acting in his capacity as treasurer, and it informed me that due to unforeseen circumstances and a comprehensive review of recent enforcement actions, My snow load violation was being rescinded. The fine was canceled. No explanation beyond that. I should have been satisfied. I had won, in a sense, but I could not let it go. Patricia had tried to extort $800 from me for a fake violation while her own house was a legitimate safety hazard. How many other people had she fined unfairly? How much money had she collected from homeowners too tired or too scared to fight back? I started making calls. I reached out to every neighbor I could find who had ever complained about Patricia on social media or in casual conversation. I talked to Alina, Marcus, and a dozen others. Each person had a story: excessive fines, arbitrary rules, selective enforcement. A picture emerged of years of abuse and petty tyranny. We organized a meeting at a local coffee shop on a Saturday morning. 23 people showed up, which was more than I expected. We talked for 2 hours about our experiences and what could be done. Alina, who had lived in Riverside Meadows longer than anyone, explained that Patricia had been HOA president for 7 years. She ran unopposed in every election because she had made it so unpleasant to challenge her that no one wanted the job. "We need to force a recall vote," I said. "Get her off the board entirely. We have the numbers if everyone is willing to push for it." The group agreed, but the challenge was getting enough signatures. We needed to gather petition signatures from 51 homeowners to trigger a recall election, per the HOA bylaws. Then we needed 101 votes in the actual election to remove her. We divided up the neighborhood and spent the next 2 weeks knocking on doors. The response was overwhelming. People were thrilled that someone was finally taking action. We collected 87 signatures, well over the threshold. I submitted the recall petition to the HOA board, as required by the bylaws. Patricia fought back immediately. She sent a mass email to all homeowners claiming that the recall effort was being led by disgruntled individuals with a personal vendetta, and that removing her would destabilize the community. She posted on the neighborhood forum, accusing me by name of spreading false information. She even tried to issue me another violation, this time for having my trash cans visible from the street 15 minutes past the allowed time on collection day. The fine was $250. Robert Cross called me that evening. "Isaac, I want you to know that I voted against that trash can violation. It is absurd. Patricia is panicking." "Good," I said. "She should be. Listen, there is something you should know. Patricia's house insurance is not covering the full cost of the roof collapse. Apparently, she let her policy lapse into a bare minimum plan to save money. She is facing hundreds of thousands in repair costs, and she is trying to find ways to pay for it." "What does that have to do with anything?" Robert hesitated. "I have been reviewing the HOA finances more carefully recently. There are some discrepancies. Money that should be in the reserve fund is not there. I think Patricia has been using HOA funds for personal expenses." My blood ran cold. "Are you serious? That is embezzlement." "I do not have proof yet, just inconsistencies. But I wanted you to know. If she is removed from the board, a full audit would be appropriate." "Robert, why are you telling me this?" Another pause. "Because I should have stood up to her a long time ago. I did not, and I regret it. Consider this my small way of making amends." The recall election was scheduled for mid-March, 6 weeks after the original snow load incident. The HOA bylaws required a special meeting with all homeowners given at least 30 days' notice. Patricia tried every procedural trick she could think of to delay or derail the process. But Robert, acting as treasurer, insisted on following the rules correctly. The night of the election, the clubhouse was packed. Over 150 homeowners showed up, the largest turnout in the community's history. The energy in the room was electric. Patricia sat at the board table looking haggard. Her hair was not perfectly styled. Her blazer looked rumpled. The roof collapse had clearly taken a toll. The format was simple. Patricia would have 15 minutes to speak in her defense. I would have 15 minutes to explain why the recall was necessary, and then homeowners would cast their votes by secret ballot. Patricia went first. She stood at the podium and launched into a defensive speech about her years of service, the improvements she had overseen, and the importance of strong leadership. She called the recall effort divisive and unnecessary. She claimed that her roof collapse was an unforeseeable tragedy and had nothing to do with her leadership abilities. She even got emotional at one point, her voice cracking as she talked about the stress of losing her home. A few people looked sympathetic, but most faces remained skeptical. Then it was my turn. I walked to the podium with notes in hand, but I barely needed them. I had lived this for weeks. "I am not here to personally attack Patricia Henderson," I began. "I am here because this community deserves leadership that is fair, transparent, and accountable. Over the past 7 years, we have seen a pattern of arbitrary fines, selective enforcement, and rules that seem designed more to generate revenue than to actually protect property values or safety." I detailed specific examples that other homeowners had shared with me. The woman fined $500 because her mailbox was the wrong shade of black. The family charged $300 for parking their own car in their own driveway overnight when a guest was visiting. The couple hit with a $1,000 fine for installing a solar panel without submitting the right form, even though the form was not mentioned anywhere in the bylaws when they installed the panel. "And then there is my case," I continued. "I was fined $800 for having snow on my roof. Normal snow from a normal winter storm on a roof that was fully capable of supporting it. Meanwhile, Patricia's own roof collapsed from that same snow because her house was not properly maintained. The irony would be funny if it were not so infuriating." The room erupted in applause. Patricia's face turned red. I held up a hand for quiet. But there is more. Recently, questions have been raised about the HOA's financial management. Reserve funds that should be available are not fully accounted for. Before this community moves forward, we need a complete, independent audit of HOA finances. We need transparency. We need accountability. And we need leadership that respects homeowners instead of treating them like sources of revenue. More applause. I sat down, my heart pounding. Patricia looked like she wanted to say something, but the moderator, an independent attorney hired to run the election, announced it was time to vote. Ballots were distributed and collected. The counting took about 30 minutes, done in full view of designated observers from both sides. Finally, the moderator returned to the podium. "The results of the recall election are as follows. Total votes cast, 143. Votes required to recall, 101. Votes in favor of recall, 127. Votes against recall, 16. Patricia Henderson is hereby removed from her position as HOA president, effective immediately." The room exploded in cheers. Patricia stood abruptly, grabbed her purse, and stormed out without a word. Martin followed her, which made sense since he had been her lapdog the entire time. Linda looked relieved. Robert was openly smiling. Craig looked confused, probably because he had barely paid attention to anything the entire time. The board was required to appoint an interim president until the next regular election. They chose Robert, who accepted reluctantly but promised to run things differently. The first thing he did was authorize a full forensic audit of the HOA's finances, to be conducted by an independent accounting firm. The audit took 6 weeks. The results were damning. Over the past 4 years, Patricia had systematically diverted HOA funds for personal use. She had charged personal expenses to the HOA credit card, including luxury purchases, expensive dinners, and even part of her home renovation costs before the roof collapse. She had also inflated contractor bills for community maintenance projects and pocketed the difference. In total, she had embezzled approximately $67,000. Robert contacted the Spokane Police Department and provided them with the audit report. An investigation was opened. Patricia was arrested 3 weeks later on charges of theft in the first degree and forgery. Apparently, she had created fake invoices to cover her tracks, which added the forgery charges. The legal process moved forward slowly, as these things always do. Patricia hired an expensive defense attorney and tried to claim the charges were retaliation for the recall. But the evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, credit card statements, forged documents, all of it painted a clear picture of deliberate, ongoing theft. In August, 7 months after the original snow load fine, Patricia accepted a plea deal. She pled guilty to theft in the first degree and agreed to pay full restitution to the HOA. She was sentenced to 18 months in prison, with credit for time served and the possibility of early release for good behavior. She was also ordered to pay an additional $20,000 in fines and penalties to the state. The HOA used the restitution money to replenish the reserve fund and actually reduced everyone's monthly dues for a year. Robert was elected as the permanent president in the regular election that fall, running on a platform of transparency and common sense. He immediately revised the most ridiculous bylaws and established clear, objective standards for violations and fines. As for me, I became somewhat of a local legend in Riverside Meadows. People still brought up the story at neighborhood gatherings, always with a sense of satisfaction at how justice had been served. My roof never did collapse, obviously. The snow melted naturally in late March, and everything was fine. Just like I had said it would be. I ran into a leaner at the grocery store one afternoon in early September. She gave me a big hug and thanked me again for standing up to Patricia. "You know, Isaac, you should consider running for the board yourself. We need people who actually care about doing the right thing," I laughed. "I appreciate that, Alina, but I think I have had enough HOA drama to last a lifetime." "Fair enough. But if you ever change your mind, you have my vote." I did not run for the board, but I did stay involved in community matters. I attended meetings regularly and made sure to stay informed about decisions that affected my property and my neighbors. The experience had taught me that HOAs could be valuable when run properly, but they required active participation and oversight from homeowners. Apathy was what allowed people like Patricia to thrive. One Saturday in October, I was raking leaves in my front yard when a car pulled up. It was Robert. He rolled down his window and waved. "Hey, Isaac, you got a minute?" I walked over, leaning against the passenger door. "Sure, what is up?" "I wanted to let you know that we finalized a settlement with Patricia's insurance company. Between that and the restitution payments, the HOA is actually in the best financial shape it has been in years. We are planning some real improvements. New playground equipment, resurfacing the community pool, maybe even some landscaping upgrades at the entrance." "That is great news." Robert nodded. "It is. And none of it would have happened if you had not pushed back on that ridiculous fine. You could have just paid it and moved on like most people do. But you did not. You stood up and you rallied everyone else. You literally changed this community for the better." I felt my face flush with embarrassment. I just did not want to pay $800 for nothing. Well, whatever the motivation, thank you. Seriously. We chatted for a few more minutes before Robert drove off. I went back to raking leaves, thinking about everything that had happened. The fine, the hearing, the roof collapse, the recall, the criminal charges. It had been an exhausting, stressful, sometimes infuriating journey, but it had also been worth it. The following spring, I got my roof inspected as part of routine maintenance. The inspector confirmed what I already knew. The structure was sound, the shingles were in great condition, and there was no damage whatsoever from the previous winter's snow. He did make one interesting observation, though. "You know, I have been inspecting houses in this area for 20 years, he said. Patricia Henderson's place, the one with the big collapse last year, I actually looked at that house back when it was first built. I told the owners then that the roof support system was undersized for the snow loads we get here. They did not want to pay for the upgrades. I guess they figured they would take their chances. That never ends well." I thought about that as he packed up his equipment and left. Patricia had spent years harassing homeowners over imaginary violations while ignoring real problems with her own property. She had abused her authority, stolen money, and created misery for countless people. And in the end, her own negligence had literally brought the roof down on her head. There was something almost poetic about it. Life in Riverside Meadows settled into a pleasant routine after that. The HOA under Robert's leadership was responsive, but not overbearing. Fines were issued only for legitimate violations, and always with clear warnings and opportunities to correct problems before penalties kicked in. The community felt more like an actual community, with neighbors helping each other instead of living in fear of arbitrary enforcement. I stayed in touch with many of the people who had joined the recall effort. Marcus and I became good friends, bonding over our shared frustration with petty bureaucracy and our love of basketball. Eleanor continued to be the unofficial neighborhood grandmother, always knowing everyone's business but in a caring rather than nosy way. On the 1-year anniversary of the roof collapse, someone posted a humorous memorial on the neighborhood Facebook group. It was a photo of Patricia's house during the collapse, with a caption that read, "1 year ago today, Karma came calling, and she brought a snow shovel." The post got over 200 reactions and dozens of comments, all of them celebrating the downfall of a tyrant and the positive changes that had followed. I added my own comment. "Here is to fair enforcement, honest leadership, and roofs that do not fall down. Cheers, everyone." That winter, we got even more snow than the previous year. 14 inches fell over a 3-day period in January, blanketing the entire neighborhood in white. I watched the accumulation on my roof with amusement, remembering the panic Patricia had tried to create over a similar amount. My roof was fine. Everyone's roofs were fine, because that is what roofs are designed to do, handle snow. Robert sent out a community notice reminding everyone to be mindful of excessive accumulation and to shovel their sidewalks for safety. But there were no threats, no fines, no arbitrary enforcement, just common sense guidance, the way it should be. I ran into Linda Brennan, the former board secretary, at a community event that February. She had stepped down from the board after Patricia's removal, wanting a break from HOA politics. We chatted about how things had improved, and she shared something I had not known. "I wanted to vote against your fine at that hearing," she admitted. "I knew it was ridiculous. But Patricia had this way of making you feel like if you disagreed with her, she would turn everyone against you. She ruled through intimidation. I am ashamed that I went along with it for as long as I did." "You are not the only one," I assured her. "A lot of people were in the same position. What matters is that things changed." She smiled gratefully. Robert is doing a great job. The HOA actually feels like it is working for us now, instead of against us. That really summed it up perfectly. The HOA was supposed to be a tool for maintaining property values and creating a pleasant living environment. Under Patricia, it had become a weapon for personal enrichment and petty power trips. Under Robert, it was returning to its intended purpose. Patricia herself was released from prison after serving 11 months. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she moved to another state, somewhere in the Midwest, to live with relatives. Her house had been sold to cover debts and legal fees. I never saw her again, which was fine with me. The new owners of Patricia's former house were a young couple with 2 kids. They were friendly, normal people who just wanted a nice place to raise their family. They had the roof completely rebuilt with proper engineering, and the house looked better than it ever had under Patricia's ownership. I helped them move in, along with several other neighbors. It was a warm Saturday in May, and we spent the afternoon carrying boxes and furniture while the kids ran around the yard. At one point, the husband, whose name was Tom, asked me about the house's history. "We heard something about the previous owner having legal problems," he said. "The realtor was kind of vague about it." I gave him the abbreviated version: HOA president, embezzlement, roof collapse, criminal charges. His eyes got wider with each detail. "Wow," he said when I finished. "That is crazy. We just thought we were buying a nice house." "You did buy a nice house," I assured him. "It has a new roof and new owners. Fresh start," he laughed. "Well, I am glad we are starting with a clean slate, and no HOA drama, I hope. Not anymore. The new board is great." "You will be fine." Tom and his wife, Sarah, integrated seamlessly into the neighborhood. Their kids played with other kids on the street. They came to community events. They paid their dues on time and kept their property looking nice. In other words, they were exactly the kind of residents an HOA should want. I thought about that often in the months that followed. An HOA at its best was supposed to create standards that helped everyone. Reasonable rules about maintaining property, keeping noise down, ensuring shared spaces were cared for. The problem came when people like Patricia twisted those rules into tools of control and revenue generation. By the time another winter rolled around, the whole snow load incident felt like ancient history. Robert sent out the same common-sense reminders about winter maintenance. A few people proactively shoveled their roofs after a particularly heavy storm, but most did not need to. The houses in Riverside Meadows were well built, with proper engineering. The snow was not a problem. I was sitting in my living room one evening in December, watching snowflakes drift past the window when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Marcus. "Hey, did you see the news article about Patricia?" I had not. He sent me a link. It was a local news story from the Spokane area, a retrospective piece about HOA fraud cases. Patricia's case was featured prominently, described as an example of how unchecked authority and lack of oversight could lead to corruption. The article quoted Robert extensively, discussing the reforms Riverside Meadows had implemented and encouraging other communities to learn from what had happened. I was mentioned too, identified as a homeowner who challenged an unfair fine and ultimately exposed years of financial misconduct. The reporter had made it sound much more dramatic than it felt at the time, but I suppose that was how journalism worked. Marcus sent another text. "You are famous, dude," I replied. "Infamous maybe, but I will take it." The truth was, I did not feel particularly heroic. I had just been a guy who did not want to pay an unjust fine. Everything that followed had been a combination of stubbornness, luck, and the help of many other frustrated neighbors. But if the story could help other communities recognize and address similar problems, then maybe some good came from the whole ordeal. Spring arrived again, bringing warmer temperatures and melting snow. My roof, for the third year running, remained intact and functional. The engineering report I had shown Patricia at that disastrous hearing continued to be accurate. The structure was sound, the load capacity was more than adequate, and there was never any danger. Robert stepped down as HOA president after 2 years, having stabilized the community and implemented lasting reforms. A woman named Jennifer Carlson was elected to replace him, running on a platform of continuing Robert's sensible policies. The transition was smooth and drama-free. I eventually became so comfortable in Riverside Meadows that I stopped thinking about HOAs as inherently problematic. They were tools, nothing more. In the right hands, they could be beneficial. In the wrong hands, they could be nightmares. The key was active participation and a willingness to hold leaders accountable. Years passed. I got a promotion at work. I dated someone for a while, though it did not work out. I adopted a dog, a goofy golden retriever named Cooper who loved playing in the snow. Life went on as it always does, with the Patricia Henderson incident fading into a story I told occasionally at parties or when new neighbors asked about community history. But I never forgot the lessons I learned. Never assume authority figures are acting in good faith just because they hold positions of power. Never accept unjust treatment just because fighting back seems difficult. Never underestimate the power of community members coming together for a common cause. And never, ever ignore the engineering specifications for your roof. The last lesson was perhaps the most literal, but also the most important. Patricia had destroyed her own house, her finances, her freedom, and her reputation because she had not maintained her property while hypocritically attacking others for the same supposed failure. If she had spent half the energy actually fixing her roof that she spent harassing homeowners, none of the subsequent disaster would have happened. I drove past the house that used to be Patricia's one afternoon, years after everything had settled. Tom and Sarah had painted it a cheerful yellow with white trim. The kids had a swing set in the backyard. The landscaping was immaculate. It looked like a completely different place, which in many ways it was. The physical structure had been rebuilt, and the spirit of the place had been transformed from a monument to one woman's ego into a warm family home. That, more than anything else, felt like the true ending to the story. The damage had been repaired, the corruption had been rooted out, and life had moved forward. Justice had been served, not through revenge or cruelty, but through accountability and reform. I still lived in my house with my intact roof and my goofy dog. I still worked from home, attended HOA meetings occasionally, and maintained my property to reasonable standards. I paid my dues without complaint because they were fair and used appropriately. I voted in HOA elections and stayed informed about community decisions. And every winter, when the snow fell and accumulated on my roof exactly as snow was meant to do, I smiled to myself and remembered the absurdity of that original violation notice. $800 for normal weather conditions on a properly engineered structure. It remained one of the most ridiculous things anyone had ever tried to fine me for, and I had the satisfaction of knowing that standing up to that absurdity had changed an entire community for the better. Patricia Henderson had tried to make me a victim of her petty tyranny. Instead, she had created the catalyst for her own downfall. Her roof collapsed under the weight of her own negligence and hubris, and the life she had built on corruption and intimidation crumbled along with it. Meanwhile, my roof remained solid, my conscience was clear, and my community was thriving. In the end, that was the best revenge anyone could ask for. Not revenge at all, really, but simply the natural consequences of actions, both good and bad, playing out exactly as they should. Patricia had sown injustice and reaped destruction. The rest of us had stood together, demanded better, and built something stronger in the aftermath. The snow would come again each winter, as it always did in Spokane. It would pile up on roofs throughout riverside meadows, a temporary burden that well-built structures could easily handle. And life would go on, with or without the petty tyrants who tried to make mountains out of snowflakes, with or without the people who abused power for personal gain, with or without the ones who forgot that leadership was supposed to be about service, not control. My story was not unique. HOA horror stories existed in communities across America, tales of overzealous boards and arbitrary enforcement. But my story had a good ending, better than most. Justice had been served, reforms had been implemented, and a community had been made stronger through adversity. And through it all, my roof never collapsed, not once, just like I knew it would not.